When I bought the house, I wasn't just purchasing a property, I was planting hope. After a grueling divorce that left my heart hollow and my bank account emptier than I'd ever imagined, I packed up what remained of my life and my dignity into a battered Ford Ranger and drove cross-country with my daughter Lily. She was 8, wide-eyed and brave in the way only kids can be when they think their parents have everything under control. We pulled up to the small house at the edge of Willow Creek Estates on a chilly Saturday in March. The sky was gray, the trees were bare, and our breaths fogged the air as we stepped onto the cracked driveway. But to me, it felt like a sunrise. The home wasn't fancy, just a single-story ranch with faded green shutters and a slanted mailbox that leaned like it had seen a few storms, but it had a backyard. A real one. With space. For Lily to run. For me to build something, anything that felt like permanence. I had taken a job at the county's civil engineering office, mostly field inspections and survey reviews, and I'd managed to get a modest mortgage approved thanks to a VA loan and 20 years of service. Retired from the Army Corps of Engineers. I wasn't used to home being anything but temporary. This place, this quiet cul-de-sac with picket fences and neatly trimmed lawns was supposed to be different. The first few weeks were exactly what I needed. Mornings were peaceful. I'd sip black coffee on the front porch while Lily tried to name the birds on our lawn. We painted her room lavender and strung glow-in-the-dark stars across the ceiling. I even met a few neighbors, quiet hellos, polite nods, the occasional nice to meet you while picking up the mail. Then I decided to build the fence, not the whole yard, just the back. Just enough to give Lily privacy when she played and to keep the deer from trampling through the garden we were planning. I used treated pine boards and concrete set posts, measured twice built, slow, precise. I was trained in load-bearing structures, for God's sake, this was child's play. Lily helped. She handed me screws, held the tape measure. She even wrote her name into the wet concrete at the base of the first post. We laughed the whole time, and when we were done, she called it our castle wall. I didn't think I needed permission. The yard was mine. There were no visible easements, nothing on the deed or the seller's disclosures that suggested otherwise. It was a quiet weekend project meant to reclaim some control over our lives. But peace has a way of drawing fire. On the 4th Monday morning after we moved in, there was a letter taped to my front door. Not in the mailbox. Taped like a warning. Notice of violation, unapproved structural modification. It was from the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. The letterhead was embossed heavy. Formal. I read it twice, then again. It said my newly constructed fence violated community architectural guidelines, and that I had 7 days to remove the non-compliant structure or face escalating fines. I blinked, confused. Then read the name at the bottom, Patricia L. Hensley, Chair, Architectural Review Committee. I didn't know who she was. Hadn't met her. But the tone of the letter was unmistakable, cold, officious, and absolute. No invitation to discuss. No questions. Just demand and consequence. I stood there holding the paper, while Lily ate cereal in the kitchen behind me, humming the theme song to some cartoon. My jaw tightened. That fence was as solid and lawful as anything I'd built. It wasn't even on the HOA's shared land, or so I thought. I went out back and paced the line. Measured the distance again. Checked the old plat map the realtor had provided. Everything was as it should be. The fence stood a solid 2 feet inside the lot boundary, which itself abutted a strip of unpaved greenbelt that, as far as I could tell, was owned by the county and left undeveloped. But none of that mattered to Patricia. 2 days later, she came to my door. I saw her from the window, mid-50s, sharp bob haircut, clipboard in hand, moving like she owned oxygen itself. She didn't knock. She tapped, like a metronome of judgment. When I opened the door, she didn't introduce herself. Just looked me up and down like I was late to an appointment I never scheduled. "You're the new owner at 114 Sycamore, yes?" I nodded. "That's right. Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Hensley, Chair of the Architectural Committee. We issued you a notice." "Yes, I read it." Her eyes darted past me toward the hallway behind. The fence must come down. It violates Article 4, Section 3 of the Willow Creek Standards. I leaned against the doorframe. The fence is on my property. Your lot ends before the slope begins. That area is common use greenbelt. That slope belongs to the county, I said calmly. It was never deeded to the HOA. She squinted, a tight smile spreading. That's not your decision to make. And just like that, I knew this wasn't about the fence. It was about control. About someone who had spent too long wielding unchecked authority in a quiet neighborhood and didn't know how to deal with someone who asked questions. I won't be removing anything I said. Not until I see a legal property line that contradicts the one on file with the county. Patricia sniffed like I'd insulted her perfume. You'll be fined. Daily. Then he'll appeal, legally. She didn't like that. The smile dropped. People who pick fights with the HOA don't tend to stay long, she said. This neighborhood runs on order. I held her gaze. Years in military operations had taught me when someone was bluffing and when they were trying to intimidate. This house is my home, I said, voice low, and I don't back down from bullies. Patricia turned sharply, heels clicking against the walkway like gavel strikes. As she left, Lily peeked around the hallway corner, eyes wide. Daddy, are we in trouble? I bent down, hugged her, kissed the top of her head. Not at all, sweetheart, I whispered. We're just getting started. The next morning, the mailbox held more than just coupons and junk mail. Wedged between a realtor flyer and a grocery circular was a stark white envelope thicker than usual, stamped with the Willow Creek Estates HOA seal. My name was printed in all capital letters as if I were already guilty of something. I took it inside and sat at the kitchen table. Lily was still sleeping upstairs, the soft hum of her nightlight monitor barely audible. The kitchen smelled faintly of toast crumbs and wood glue from our recent DIY adventures. I opened the envelope carefully, more out of instinct than dread. Inside was a formal letter, this time even more severe than the first notice. Second notice of violation. Subject: unauthorized structural erection fence. Date of initial infraction: March 11th. Location: lot 114. Rear perimeter status: non-compliant, pursuant to the Willow Creek Estates. Architectural code: your erected fence has been determined to be in violation of Section 4.3. Exterior modifications without prior review. You are hereby given final notice to dismantle the structure within 72 hours or face the following penalties. Initial fine $150, daily accumulation $50, revocation of community privileges, potential legal proceedings. Sincerely, Patricia L. Hensley, Chairwoman, Willow Creek, HOA Architectural Committee. I read the letter twice, fingers tightening as I reached the signature line. Not only had Patricia escalated the tone, she was actively threatening legal action for offense on my own property. I sat back, exhaled, and stared out the window at the line of pine boards standing tall and straight like sentries guarding my backyard. There was no mistake. I had reviewed every plat, every recorded easement, every document that had passed through the county assessor's office in the last 20 years for this subdivision. I'd even found a survey marker partially buried in the soil next to the fence's edge. The HOA's claims weren't just overreaching, they were blatantly unfounded. But I knew better than to fight fire with fire, at least not yet. I started documenting. I photographed the fence from every angle. I took video with a timestamp. I scanned every page of the HOA's bylaws and noted that the community map they referenced hadn't been updated since 1996, 2 years before the rear slope was officially annexed to county parkland as part of a conservation overlay. Then I visited the county office during lunch. Ms. Ortiz, the records clerk, remembered me from a previous permit review. "Back so soon, Mr. Carter?" she asked, adjusting her glasses. "What are we digging up this time?" "Trouble," I said with a half smile. "The HOA thinks my fence is on their land." She rolled her eyes and motioned for me to follow. In a back room filled with steel drawers and flat files, she pulled out an aerial overlay printed on vellum. "Here's Willow Creek," she said, laying it on the lightboard. Your property lot, 114, backs up to this conservation strip. That land's managed by the county. HOA doesn't touch it. Can I get a certified copy of that? I asked. Absolutely. We've had a few complaints about that HOA lately. Power happy. I left the office with a manila envelope under my arm and a plan forming in my mind. But when I returned home, that confidence started to shake. A yellow paper was pinned to my door with blue painter's tape. Intent to fine active enforcement begins at 6:00 a.m. tomorrow. They weren't wasting time, and they weren't bluffing either. That evening, Lily and I made spaghetti. She told me about her reading class and how she got to be the line leader during recess. Her world was still simple, still clean. I promised myself I would keep it that way. Later that night, I received an email from an HOA board member named Harold Barnes, someone whose name I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Consider your actions carefully." Inside it was even worse. "Mr. Carter, your recent disregard for community procedures is disruptive to the spirit of Willow Creek. Non-compliance is taken seriously, and repeat offenders are flagged for escalation. Legal counsel may be engaged. For the sake of your daughter's comfort and your integration into this community, I strongly suggest cooperation. Sincerely, Harold Barnes, Willow Creek, HOA Governance Chair." I reread it stunned. For the sake of your daughter. That wasn't a suggestion. That was a veiled threat. I felt a coldness rise in my chest, the kind that had nothing to do with the weather. I'd seen this kind of behavior before, in command briefings, in war zones, in hostile negotiations. It was the language of control dressed up in courtesy. I put Lily to bed and stepped outside. The night was quiet. A soft wind rustled the trees. The fence stood under the pale light of a crescent moon, as steady as when we built it. I walked its length, hand trailing across the boards. At the base of one post, Lily's little name was still etched in the concrete, Lily 31225. This wasn't about lumber or bylaws anymore. It was about boundaries, both literal and personal. About whether I was willing to surrender the sanctuary I had finally built. I wasn't. The next morning, I called my old Army buddy Marcus Fielding, a real estate attorney with a specialization in land disputes. "I was wondering when you'd call," he said, when I explained everything. These HOA types always overreach. They're banking on the fact that most people don't push back. "I'm not most people. That's why I like you," he chuckled. "Send me everything you've got. Let's see if we can remind Patricia that there's a difference between authority and jurisdiction." By the end of the day, I had compiled a binder of maps, emails, legal parcels, and certified documentation. Marcus began drafting a cease and desist letter to the HOA. Meanwhile, I drafted a letter of my own to the County Land Management Office requesting formal verifications of the shared boundary line and a field inspection. 3 days later, just as the HOA began billing me daily fines, I got a call from a man named Dennis Rourke. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I'm with the county. We've received your inquiry and documentation. I'd like to schedule a visit to confirm the site." That was the first domino, and Patricia had no idea what was coming. 3 days after the county call, Patricia returned this time without a clipboard. It was just past 9 in the morning. Lily had already left for school, and I was working on my laptop at the kitchen table, combing through zoning precedent cases Marcus had forwarded to me when I saw the shape of a figure through the frosted glass panel beside the front door. The knock was sharp. Not urgent, not polite, just insistent. I didn't move for a second. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, Patricia stood in a neatly pressed beige pantsuit, holding nothing but her purse and an icy smile. Her posture was flawless. Her expression controlled like someone who had prepared this moment in her mirror. "Mr. Carter," she said, tilting her chin upward, "I wanted to speak to you face to face, privately." I didn't invite her in. "You've been pretty vocal in writing." She pursed her lips, ignoring the jab. "I'm here as a courtesy, not as HOA chair. I thought we might have a neighborly conversation." I leaned against the frame. "All right. Talk." Patricia glanced around the porch as though checking for eavesdroppers. You're new here. Willow Creek is a tightly knit community, Mr. Carter. We value consistency, order, and cooperation. I value boundaries, I replied. She sighed through her nose. I understand you believe the land behind your lot isn't subject to HOA oversight. That's a common misconception. It's not a belief, I said, holding up the manila folder resting on the entryway table. It's a legal fact. County issued. Certified. Her eyes narrowed slightly. We have maps, too. Yours are 25 years out of date and unregistered. I've reviewed them. A flicker of something passed across her face. For a split second, her mask slipped, but it snapped back with practiced speed. You're creating division, she said coolly. Several homeowners have expressed discomfort over your refusal to comply. You're setting a dangerous precedent. You mean I'm showing people they can push back? Patricia's voice dropped a half step. We can levy daily penalties, restrict community privileges, and should you choose to escalate further, we're prepared to initiate mediation proceedings. That was it. The real reason she was here. They were worried. The cease and desist letter Marcus had sent must have rattled the board. They didn't expect someone with my background to push back with legal teeth. They expected compliance, submission. I was breaking the pattern. I crossed my arms. You'll find that mediation doesn't intimidate me. Her smile faltered. Before she could respond, a silver SUV pulled up to the curb. Dennis Rourke from the county. I recognized him from his profile picture and the call earlier that week. He stepped out with a field tablet and a neon orange survey vest half-zipped over his button-down. Patricia turned to him confused. Can I help you? He didn't even glance at her. Mr. Carter, I stepped forward. That's me. I'm with County Land Management. I'm here for the site verification. Patricia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. Site verification, she repeated. Dennis finally acknowledged her. And you are? I'm Patricia Hensley, chairwoman of this HOA. This land falls under our jurisdiction. Dennis raised a brow. Not according to the county register. If you'd like to provide updated deed filings, I'll be happy to review them. Patricia looked to me, then back to Dennis, then to the fence. I could see her calculating her next move, but there was no good option. She hadn't expected the county to intervene, and certainly not on my side. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding, she said, her tone sugary again. We've simply had concerns about non-compliance. It's our responsibility to maintain aesthetic uniformity. I'm not here about aesthetics, Dennis said dryly. I'm here about ownership lines. He turned to me. Do you have the original property plat? I handed him the folder. He flipped through it, nodding. Excellent. I'll confirm with the GIS files on the cloud and flag any discrepancies. Patricia stood still, arms crossed, lips drawn so tight they looked white. You'll be surveying along the slope and rear elevation, Dennis added. Might take an hour or so. Patricia turned sharply on her heel and walked away without another word. I watched her leave, feeling the tension in my shoulders uncoil slightly. Dennis and I walked the property together. I showed him the corner markers, the buried pin near the fence post, and the exact measurements. He took photos, entered notes into his tablet, and nodded with every cross-reference. This fence, he said, tapping his stylus against the wood, is about 1 foot within your boundary. And this boundary ends exactly where county jurisdiction begins. The HOA has no claim over this stretch. Period. I couldn't help but smile. Would you be willing to provide that in writing? You'll have an official letterhead document by Friday, he said. And if they try to file a dispute, it'll be rejected unless they can produce conflicting documentation, which I doubt exists. By the time he left, I felt the first breath of real relief since this began. But the victory was premature. That night around midnight, I heard a noise. A hollow thunk-thunk echoed from the backyard. I grabbed a flashlight and slipped out the back door barefoot on the cool grass. The moon was bright, casting long shadows across the fence line. I moved quietly, years of military patrol training suddenly resurfacing like muscle memory. That's when I saw her Patricia's husband, or at least a man who looked like him, crouching at the base of one of the posts, a claw hammer in hand. He was trying to pry the support boards loose. I stepped forward into the beam of light. He froze. "Need help?" I asked, voice low. He stood slowly, the hammer dangling in his hand. I was just committing trespass and vandalism," I said. "Shall I call the sheriff, or would you like to explain this to Patricia yourself?" He muttered something under his breath and took off down the side path, disappearing between the neighbor's bushes. I took pictures of the damage and saved the security camera footage from the motion sensor floodlight I'd installed 2 weeks prior. The next morning, I sent it all to Marcus. By noon, he had filed a restraining order request and a formal complaint to the HOA's insurance carrier for property damage. I didn't hear from Patricia for 5 days, but I knew this wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Patricia's silence didn't comfort me. It felt less like surrender and more like retreat. Strategic. Calculated. And if my years in the military had taught me anything, it was that the quiet before the next strike was often more dangerous than the fight itself. I spent those 5 days preparing not for war, but for clarity. If I was going to protect my home, my daughter, and my right to simply exist in peace, I needed more than evidence. I needed to understand why people like Patricia clung so tightly to power that wasn't truly theirs. On Monday, I returned to the county office again. Miss Ortiz smiled as I approached the counter, her reading glasses halfway down her nose. "Back already, Mr. Carter." "Afraid so," I said. "This time I need deep records. Subdivision plats, ownership transfers, even development plans pre-HOA." She tilted her head. "You digging for gold or ghosts?" "Maybe both," I said. She led me to a back room rarely used by the public. Floor-to-ceiling cabinets, microfiche reels, binders so old their corners curled with time. We spread out the archives on a long wooden table beneath flickering fluorescent lights. The Willow Creek subdivision, it turned out, had a long paper trail. Originally developed in 1994, it was part of a larger master plan called Hollow Ridge, which was never fully completed due to environmental setbacks. The parcel behind my home, the gentle slope running down to a dry creek, was designated as unbuildable runoff land, subject to erosion control measures from the county. In 1998, that parcel was formally dedicated back to the county as a conservation strip under Title 23 of the state's land code. The plat had 2 signatures, one from the developer and one from a county supervisor. No HOA representation. No transfer of stewardship. Then in 2004, the Willow Creek Estates HOA was officially formed 6 years after the slope had already been deeded to the county. I stared at the dates and signatures, stunned. The HOA was enforcing rules on land it never owned and perhaps never understood. "Has anyone else in the neighborhood dealt with this?" I asked. Ms. Ortiz tapped her keyboard. "Looks like we had 2 other inquiries in the past 7 years. Same issue, backlot disputes. But the homeowners eventually gave in." I felt a slow burn rise in my chest. "They just gave in," she nodded. "HOAs usually bank on people not wanting to fight. And most folks don't know where to look for this stuff. But I did, and now I had it in writing. I took copies of every document, including the 1998 dedication plat, and scanned them into a flash drive. Marcus would want digital backups. He was already prepping a civil injunction, our next escalation if Patricia tried anything else. When I got home, Lily was in the backyard coloring chalk hearts onto the patio stones. She looked up as I opened the sliding door. "Daddy, can we plant sunflowers?" "Soon, sweetheart. Real soon." The fence stood tall behind her, solid and unmoved, like a monument to resistance. That night, I finally sat down to write a formal letter of my own. Not to the HOA, not to Patricia, but to the City Planning Commission. I outlined everything: the fence's placement within legal property boundaries, the 1998 transfer of land jurisdiction to the county, the HOA's false claims of authority, the attempted vandalism and intimidation, the conflict of interest and lack of transparency in how Patricia wielded power. I didn't write like a homeowner. I wrote like an engineer, like a soldier, like a father trying to hold the line. I included the county maps, the legal descriptions, the signed plats, and the email chain with Dennis Rourke. I even attached the footage of Patricia's husband under cover of Nightclaw hammer in hand. I sent it certified mail. 3 copies, one to the city, one to the county's legal department, and one to the HOA board as a formal challenge of authority under the civil code governing homeowner associations. It was a declaration. No more letters taped to doors. No more passive-aggressive threats disguised as concern. I was done playing defense. 2 days later, the sheriff came by. At first, I tensed when I saw the cruiser pull into the cul-de-sac. Lily was still at school, and my stomach twisted with old reflexes. Tight-lipped officers didn't usually bring good news. But Deputy Rayburn stepped out with a polite nod and a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter, that's me. I'm following up on a damage report filed on your behalf. Mind if we take a walk?" I walked him along the fence line, pointing out where the boards had been pried and the base of the post that had been loosened. I handed him the USB drive with the footage. Rayburn watched the clip on his cruiser's dash-mounted screen, shaking his head. "Looks like an attempted sabotage," he said. "Can you confirm it was criminal?" "Well," he said carefully, "it's trespassing and attempted property damage, both misdemeanors. But proving identity may be tricky unless you press charges directly." "I might, just not yet." Rayburn nodded almost sympathetically. "These HOA feuds, they bring out the worst in people. You'd be surprised how many fences I've been called about." "Not anymore," I said. By Friday, I received Dennis Rourke's official letter. It was 3 pages long, printed on county letterhead, and absolutely devastating for Patricia. Official determination of parcel jurisdiction. The rear elevation fence of Parcel 114 Sycamore Lane lies entirely within private property boundaries and does not encroach upon county-controlled greenbelt. Said greenbelt parcel is under the exclusive jurisdiction of the County Land Management Office, and is not, nor has it ever been subject to oversight by the Willow Creek Estates HOA. Any regulatory actions by a private association concerning this land are deemed void. I stared at those words, then set the paper down and smiled for the first time in weeks. But I wasn't done. The next morning I printed 12 copies of the determination letter and placed them in discreet black envelopes. No threats, no statements, just facts. I walked the neighborhood, slipping one into the mailbox of every home that bordered the slope. When I reached Patricia's house, I paused. Her curtains twitched. I placed her envelope gently on the welcome mat, turned and walked away. Let her read it. Let her feel the inevitability of it sinking in. The truth was out, and the foundation of her power was beginning to crack. It was almost quiet. Too quiet. For 3 whole days there were no knocks, no letters, no sideways glances at the mailbox. Patricia's usual routine, her slow patrols of the neighborhood with that smug expression, and her ever-present clipboard had vanished. But in my gut I knew she wasn't done. People like Patricia don't admit defeat. They regroup, they scheme, and when their illusion of control starts to collapse, they lash out harder, dirtier, and without warning. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning before sunrise. I walked into the backyard with my coffee as I always did, the sky still a soft lavender before dawn. I had installed a small solar spotlight to highlight Lily's name in the concrete at the base of the first fence post. It was a reminder of why I fought, of what we were building. But that morning the spotlight was missing. Torn clean from the ground wire clipped. I scanned the rest of the fence. That's when I saw it. Deep scratches across the wooden slats. Not random wear, but deliberate. Crude words etched across 3 panels, too high for Lily, too jagged to be anything but malicious. "This isn't your land." It hit me like a punch. Not just because it was vandalism, but because it was a lie. A bitter, hollow lie that someone still clung to despite overwhelming proof to the contrary. I photographed everything. Every scratch, every broken wire, every footprint in the dirt along the back edge. I pulled the footage from the motion sensor cam I'd mounted 2 weeks ago, this time facing the slope, and there she was, Patricia, at 2:17 a.m., wearing a headlamp and dark clothes, crouched low, holding something in her hand. Her face half hidden but unmistakable. She stood at the base of the fence for almost 3 minutes, then walked away. No tools, no vandalism caught in the act, but the intent crystal clear. I sent everything to Marcus with a short message. She crossed the line. Literally. His reply came 10 minutes later. We go public now. Let's file. I'll handle the civil complaint. But you need to tell your story. Loudly. That afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I posted on the Willow Creek Neighborhood Forum. It wasn't something I'd used before. I avoided the digital drama of suburban message boards like most people avoided root canals. But this time it wasn't about gossip or complaints about teenagers parking on curbs. This time, it was about standing up. I created a post titled, "Setting the Record Straight, My Fence, My Land, and the Truth." Then I wrote, "Neighbors, some of you may know me. Some of you may not. My name is Thomas Carter, and I live at 114 Sycamore. I moved here with my daughter in hopes of building a peaceful life after a difficult chapter. I built a small fence in my backyard to give her a place to play safely. That fence became the center of a prolonged and distressing dispute with the HOA, led primarily by Chairwoman Patricia Hensley. I want to share with you the facts. The fence is fully within my property line. The land beyond is county-owned conservation land, never under HOA jurisdiction. The HOA's claims have been disproven by certified county documentation. My property has been vandalized. I have video evidence of a prominent HOA member trespassing on my land in the middle of the night. In pursuing legal action, because this is no longer about wood and nails, it's about respect, about abuse of power, about truth. If any of you have experienced similar overreach, I encourage you to speak up. This isn't just my fight, it belongs to all of us who believe our homes are sanctuaries, not battlefields. Thomas. I hit post and waited. Within the hour, the replies started rolling in. The first was quiet support. Thank you for speaking out. I had an issue with Patricia last year over a flag on my porch. Glad someone's finally standing up. Then more. She told us our garden gnomes were a safety risk. We didn't fight. Now I wish we had. They made me tear down my kid's swing set. Never showed proof it was non-compliant. We were told we couldn't plant native plants in the yard because they weren't neighborhood approved. The thread exploded. Within 24 hours, my post had over 70 replies. Some of them were anonymous. Some were furious. But the message was the same. Patricia had been bullying this neighborhood for years, hiding behind bylaws and silence. And now someone had cracked the dam. The HOA board was clearly rattled. The next day, I received a certified letter, not from Patricia, but from their attorney. It was a cease and desist claiming I had defamed a volunteer member and violated the spirit of the HOA agreement. Marcus laughed when he read it. This is them trying to play chess with checker pieces, he said. It's nonsense. They're trying to spook you. But now that they've escalated with legal correspondence, they've opened the door to discovery. And trust me, Patricia's closet has more than a few skeletons. We filed a formal complaint for harassment and property damage, citing the footage, the county letter, and the pattern of behavior. Then we submitted a motion to review the HOA's operating charter, requesting that Patricia be temporarily removed during the investigation. I also filed a police report for vandalism and trespass. Now that we had Patricia on camera near the scene of the damage, things were moving fast. But so was Patricia. 2 nights later, at 10:30 p.m., I got a knock at the door. This time it wasn't Patricia. It was a man in a navy suit holding a file folder. A private process server. Thomas Carter. Yes, you've been served. He handed me the papers and walked off without a word. The documents were from the HOA. They were suing me for willful defamation, disruption of community harmony, and malicious falsehood. I stared at the words. Then I laughed. Laughed like a man who had spent months being cornered only to realize the enemy just walked into his own trap. They'd made a critical error by suing me. They triggered discovery. And that meant everything Patricia had done, said, or hidden could be subpoenaed. Patricia wanted silence. Now she was going to get exposure. Later that night, after Lily went to sleep, I stood at the back fence again, fingers grazing the rough wood. For the first time, I didn't see it as a structure. I saw it as a line, not just between 2 plots of land, but between submission and dignity, between silence and truth. Between the person I had been after the divorce, tired, resigned, and the man I was becoming again. The line had been drawn, and I wasn't the one crossing it. By the following week, everything started unraveling for Patricia. The county's Office of Code Compliance scheduled an official visit to Willow Creek. Not a casual walkthrough, but a full audit. According to Dennis Rourke, my case had triggered a deeper review. It turns out I wasn't the only one who had questioned the HOA's authority over the county-owned slope, but I was the first to fight back with receipts. Dennis called me personally the morning of the audit. "Well, be there with 2 inspectors, a legal counsel rep and a surveyor," he said. "We're not just looking at your lot anymore. We're reviewing the entire HOA's use of land bordering county property." I wasn't surprised. Patricia had been acting like the HOA was her personal fiefdom for years, and now that spotlight was growing brighter by the hour. That same day, Marcus filed a motion to dismiss the HOA's lawsuit against me, citing it as a slapcase strategic lawsuit against public participation. California and several other states have anti-SLAPP statutes that penalize frivolous lawsuits designed to silence dissent, and this was the textbook definition. Marcus sent me the paperwork to sign with a note. "She tried to muzzle you. Now we're going to make sure she regrets filing at all." I signed it, scanned it, and sent it back. The storm had officially arrived. When the county team showed up that Thursday morning, half the neighborhood was peeking through their blinds. It's not every day you see 4 county vehicles, a legal investigator, and a city attorney walking through your cul-de-sac with clipboards and topographic scanners. I greeted them at the front porch. "Morning," I said, trying not to sound smug. Dennis smiled and shook my hand. "You've caused quite a stir, Mr. Carter." "Just trying to defend what's mine." The team set up in the backyard. They marked every corner pin, remeasured the slope, and scanned the exact path of the fence. Dennis reconfirmed that every inch of it was within my legal boundary, and that the slope itself was still very much county property. Then they moved on. Lot by lot, they inspected the back lines of 6 homes bordering the greenbelt, and that's when things started to spiral for the HOA. Apparently, several backyards had minor encroachments. A few sheds, some ornamental walls, even a pergola, all built under HOA approval. But those approvals were invalid because the HOA never owned the land. Worse, Patricia had allegedly encouraged those additions, citing beautification efforts. Now those homeowners might be facing fines not from the HOA, but from the county. I watched from my porch as Dennis and his team spoke with one of my neighbors, a kind man named Walter, who had lived on the block for 15 years. Walter looked visibly upset. I walked over once the county team left. "Hey," I said gently, "everything okay?" Walter shook his head. "They said my koi pond is technically over the line. Patricia told me it was fine when I built it 5 years ago." "You have it in writing." He laughed bitterly. "Of course not. It was a handshake deal. She said she'd take care of it. Now the county might order Walter to remove part of it and fine him for the disturbance to protected runoff land. All because Patricia thought she could bend facts with charm and threats." That evening, the county held a town meeting at the Willow Creek Community Center. The room was packed, residents, board members, city staff, and more than a few reporters. Word had spread fast after my HOA forum post and the lawsuit. I sat near the back, Lily beside me with a coloring book and headphones. I didn't want her absorbing too much of the tension. Patricia sat at the front table with the other HOA board members, her face carefully composed but pale. Her husband sat to her right, eyes darting around like he expected an ambush. At exactly 6:00 p.m., the meeting began. Dennis stepped forward first and laid it all out. The county greenbelt had never been transferred to the HOA. Multiple properties had unauthorized encroachments. The HOA had issued directives and approvals beyond its legal authority. The incident involving my fence was just the start. He read directly from the county's official findings. You could hear a pin drop. Then a woman in a city attorney's suit stood up. "We are recommending a formal pause on all HOA enforcement actions until the internal charter can be reviewed and amended," she said. Furthermore, residents affected by previous unauthorized directives may be eligible for relief or restitution. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "They're going to suspend the whole HOA." Not quite. But the board's powers were being frozen pending review, which meant Patricia's reign of petty terror had effectively ended. Then they opened the floor for public comment. I stood. "My name is Thomas Carter," I said. "I built a fence to keep my daughter safe. That's it. I followed the law. I respected the land." What I didn't expect was to be harassed, threatened, and sued by people who didn't even have the authority they claimed to. Patricia's head dropped a fraction of an inch. I was a civil engineer in the Army. I continued. "I've seen dictatorships fall in war zones. And the most dangerous ones weren't built on power, they were built on silence. I'm proud I didn't stay silent." The room broke into light applause. I wasn't trying to grandstand. But for once, the truth felt like it mattered. The next morning, Patricia resigned, not just from her position as HOA chair, but from the board entirely. Her resignation email, leaked almost instantly, was a masterpiece of self-pity. "After years of selfless service, I can no longer continue in an environment so hostile and toxic to community order." No apology, no admission of fault, just the slow hiss of a deflating ego. The board appointed an interim president, a soft-spoken retired teacher named Elsie Ramsey, who immediately promised a full audit of HOA practices and greater transparency moving forward. One of the board members reached out to me personally. "We never meant for things to go that far," he said. I didn't reply. I didn't need them to be sorry. I just needed them to stop. Back at home, Lily and I repainted the fence. We chose a warm cedar tone. She wanted to add stenciled stars, so we did just along the middle boards where her name was. That night, we sat by the garden with string lights above us drinking cocoa. She looked up and said, "Daddy, are we safe now?" I nodded. "Yeah, baby, we're safe now." And for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I actually believed it. For a brief moment, it felt like we could breathe again. Patricia was gone, the county had spoken, and the neighborhood seemed to settle into an unfamiliar stillness, as if the whole block was recovering from a long fever. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to now waved when I walked past. Walter even invited Lily and me over for lemonade on his front porch. It was small, but it mattered. But peace, as I've come to understand, isn't the absence of conflict. It's what you cling to when conflict refuses to let go. Because even though Patricia had stepped down, the lawsuit she filed through the HOA still stood, and it had real weight. My lawyer Marcus was confident we'd win. But lawsuits aren't just about truth. They're about pressure, about time, about draining your patience until you consider giving in, not because you're wrong, but because you're tired. And I was tired. Every time I saw the envelope with the court seal, my stomach twisted. Every time I explained to Lily why I had to leave early for a deposition or review, I hated the way her face fell. I'd fought wars with less emotional cost. And then came the HOA board meeting I wasn't invited to, but was told about afterward. It was Elsie Ramsey, the new interim chair, who called me. "I thought you should know," she said. At tonight's meeting, several members pushed to settle the lawsuit quietly. But two holdouts, Harold Barnes and Regina Thorne, are digging in their heels. I remembered Harold. He was the one who'd emailed me that veiled threat about Lily months ago. The man who had tried to cloak intimidation in neighborhood spirit. "I appreciate the heads up," I told her. "But I'm not backing down." "I didn't think you would," she said. And I could hear the smile in her voice. That was the thing. They were starting to realize I wasn't just another passive homeowner. I didn't fear their rules. I understood the law behind them. And worse for them, I wasn't alone anymore. Marcus moved quickly. He filed a formal anti-SLAPP motion and asked the court to dismiss the HOA's lawsuit in its entirety, citing clear-cut evidence that the suit was retaliatory and unsupported by facts. "Give them this," he told me, sliding the thick stack of exhibits across his desk. "We're not just playing defense. We're going to bury this thing." The exhibits included the county's letter affirming property lines, the HOA charter showing no jurisdiction over the slope, footage of Patricia trespassing and vandalism, the cease and desist letter they sent me compared with my factual HOA forum post, over a dozen neighbor statements detailing similar abuse and fear of retaliation. The weight of it felt good in my hands, not because it was paper, but because it was truth. And then something unexpected happened. A reporter. Her name was Naomi Price, a young local journalist from the county's civic beat. She showed up at my door with a notebook, a soft voice, and eyes that burned with quiet curiosity. "I read your HOA forum post," she said. "I've been investigating community association overreach across the state. Yours might be the clearest example I've ever seen." At first, I hesitated. Going public, letting the world peek into our private life. That wasn't me. But then I thought about every homeowner on my street who had been silenced. Every time someone gave up because it was easier than pushing back. And I thought of Lily, of what kind of man I wanted her to see when she looked at me. So I said yes. The article went live 2 weeks later. The Fence That Broke the Board: How One Homeowner Took Down a Rogue HOA, by Naomi Price County Ledger. It was clean, clear, and devastating. She laid out the facts, the harassment, the overreach, the fabricated violations. She quoted the county, the city, even Ms. Ortiz from the land office, who confirmed that most homeowners don't realize what powers HOAs don't actually have. Naomi didn't name Lily, but she wrote about a single father trying to give his daughter stability after heartbreak. The story struck a nerve. Within 24 hours, it was shared over 2,000 times. And then came the real wave. Emails, letters, messages from strangers, veterans, engineers, teachers, retired couples, people from across the country, thanking me for standing up, telling me about the HOA nightmares they'd lived through. Some worse, some still ongoing. One message hit me hard. "You reminded me that not all fights are about winning. Some are about refusing to be erased." Thank you. I sat in the backyard that night watching Lily draw chalk suns on the concrete again. The fence stood behind her, bathed in golden dusk. And for once I felt proud, not because I'd beaten Patricia, but because I'd endured. At the hearing for our anti-SLAPP motion, Marcus and I sat across from the HOA's legal counsel in a sterile courtroom lined with plastic chairs and humming fluorescent lights. Judge Hathaway was in her late 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. She listened to both sides, then flipped through the evidence binder we submitted. "This HOA filed a defamation suit," she said flatly, "against a man who posted a truthful, documented account of events that occurred on his own property." The HOA's lawyer mumbled something about protecting the community's cohesion. Judge Hathaway raised one eyebrow. "You sued someone for telling the truth," she said again. "That's not defamation. That's civic participation." Then she turned to Marcus. "Motion to dismiss. Filed and complete, Your Honor." "Granted," she said. "And am awarding attorney's fees." That last part made the HOA board wince. They'd not only lost, they'd be paying my legal bills. Outside the courthouse, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "You did it," he said. "You broke the machine." "No," I replied. "We exposed it." When I returned to Willow Creek, a hand-painted sign greeted me at my driveway. "Thank you, Thomas, for all of us." It wasn't signed. I didn't need it to be. I found it hard not to smile, even harder not to tear up. Lily ran out with her backpack swinging and threw her arms around my waist. "Did we win, Daddy?" she asked. I knelt beside her. "We did," I said. "But more importantly, we were right." The week after our courtroom victory, I received a letter from the city council. Not a summons, not a complaint, an invitation. They were holding a public forum on HOA oversight, spurred in part by the article Naomi had written and the growing online attention surrounding Willow Creek. The city had received multiple reports from other neighborhoods, concerns about unregulated enforcement, arbitrary fines, and lack of transparency. Apparently, our battle had struck a deeper nerve. They wanted me to speak. At first, I wasn't sure. I'd never stood in front of a city council before, much less as the voice for an entire community. But Marcus encouraged me. "You've lived it," he said. "You don't need to sound like a lawyer. Just speak like a neighbor." So I agreed. The night of the meeting, I wore my pressed blue shirt, the same one I wore to Lily's school play last spring. Lily insisted on helping me pick out a tie. She chose a maroon one, said it made me look like a real leader. I didn't feel like one. I felt like a man who'd simply been pushed too far. The council chambers were packed. Every seat filled, people standing in the back, reporters lining the walls. A buzz of anticipation ran through the air. Patricia wasn't there. Neither was Harold Barnes, but several HOA board members were present, seated together, silent and rigid. At 6:15, my name was called. I stepped to the podium. The microphone crackled softly as I adjusted it, and I spoke. Good evening. My name is Thomas Carter. I live on Sycamore Lane in Willow Creek Estates. I moved there with my daughter earlier this year, just the two of us starting over. I built a fence, a simple one. Nothing grand, just enough to keep my daughter safe while she played in our backyard. That fence became the center of a months-long ordeal that nearly broke us. I paused, glancing across the rows of faces. People were listening, not just with ears, but with empathy. I could feel it. Our homeowners association told me I was in violation of a rule I'd never been shown. They demanded I tear down my fence or pay daily fines. When I pushed back politely with evidence, they escalated. Threats, vandalism, a lawsuit, all over a fence that was legally and firmly on my land. There were murmurs, nods, furrowed brows. But this isn't just about me, I continued. It's about power, about how easily it can be abused when it's left unchecked, about what happens when an HOA forgets it exists to serve, not control. And it's about silence. The silence so many of my neighbors lived with for years, too afraid to speak up. I took out a folded piece of paper Lily's drawing from a few months ago. It was simple: a child, a house, and a smiling fence. She drew this while I was repairing the boards someone tried to rip out. She called it her safe space. I looked up. I fought not because I enjoy conflict. I fought because that fence wasn't just wood and nails. It was a line. Between fear and freedom. Between submission and dignity. And no community, no HOA, no person in a position of authority should be allowed to erase that line. When I stepped down, the room clapped. Not loud, but long. The kind of applause that lingers not because you asked for it, but because someone saw their story in yours. After the meeting, several people came up to me. A woman from a nearby subdivision told me her HOA fined her for having a non-neutral curtain visible from the street. A retired couple shared how their HOA threatened to lean their house over a mailbox that was 1 inch too short. It was everywhere. The city council announced a new task force that night, an oversight committee to audit HOA activity and create better protection for homeowners, for people like Lily, for families like mine. I didn't want power. I just wanted peace. But maybe to protect peace, someone has to stand up first. 2 days later, I received a letter from the Willow Creek Board, not certified. No threats, no legal jargon, just a typed page signed by Elsie Ramsey. Dear Mr. Carter, on behalf of the interim HOA Board, I want to extend a formal apology. What happened to you and your daughter was wrong. We allowed one individual's desire for control to outweigh the values of this community. Effective immediately, all fines and records associated with your fence are rescinded. Furthermore, the board has voted to adopt a new transparency charter with quarterly public reports and neighborhood town halls. We also invite you to join our advisory committee not as a member of the board, but as a citizen advocate. Sincerely, Elsie Ramsey, Interim Chair, Willow Creek Estates, HOA. I sat on the back porch, the letter in one hand, Lily's chalk in the other, and I knew what I had to do. That weekend I hosted a block party. Nothing extravagant, just a rented grill, some string lights, and a stack of folding tables borrowed from the church down the street. Neighbors brought casseroles. Kids played tag. People laughed again. Walter brought his famous smoked ribs. Even Elsie came wearing a sun hat and holding a tray of lemon bars. At sunset, I stood on a folding chair and raised a glass of lemonade. To fences, I said. Not the kind that keep people out, but the kind that protect what matters most. Everyone cheered. Lily beamed. And for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I was home. The aftermath of that city council meeting spread like wildfire. Naomi Price wrote a follow-up piece titled, "From Fence to Reform, How One Man Sparked a Movement, and It Made It into the Regional Paper." Radio stations began covering the story. Even a local TV channel reached out requesting an interview. I declined not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to become a symbol. I was just a father who happened to fight back. But not everyone was quiet. The public backlash against Willow Creek's HOA was swift and fierce. The neighborhood's online forum, once filled with lost dog posts and irrigation tips, was now a war zone of old grievances being unearthed. One neighbor, Ms. Larson, posted, "Patricia fined me for planting lavender instead of the approved boxwoods. I cried for a week. Thomas, thank you for standing up. I wish I had." Another wrote, "They made my husband take down his war memorial garden. Told us it didn't meet aesthetic standards. He served in Afghanistan." For every story I read, a weight I hadn't known I was carrying grew heavier. This had never just been about me. I was merely the first crack in a dam under pressure for years, and then the real reckoning began. Elsie Ramsey called an emergency special session for all HOA members to review the scope of overreach and consider removal of standing board members who had enabled or perpetuated unlawful conduct. Patricia, who had already resigned, was now the focus of a separate investigation. Harold Barnes and Regina Thorne were now under review for knowingly approving fines on properties that bordered land outside HOA control. They denied any wrongdoing at first, but internal emails discovered through our earlier court filings painted a damning picture. One message from Harold to Patricia, dated 3 months before my arrival, read, "We can't keep losing control of the back lots. If we don't enforce some kind of presence, they'll think it's a free-for-all." Patricia's reply, "Let's push hard. Most of them won't fight. They never do." That line hit me like a gut punch. It wasn't just negligence. It was strategic suppression, a calculated bet that no one would resist. But they bet wrong. At the emergency session, which took place in the community hall that once felt cold and sterile, something shifted. It was packed. Dozens of homeowners came. Some had never attended a meeting before. Some had been too afraid to speak. Now, with Patricia gone and the board fractured, they were ready. The energy in the room was electric anger, yes, but also hope. The air of people reclaiming something that had never truly been theirs to begin with. Elsie stood at the front, hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady. "We failed to protect you from the system that was supposed to serve you," she said. "No more. Tonight you decide who stays and who steps down." Votes were cast by secret ballot. When the results were read, the hall erupted. Harold and Regina were removed. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability. They walked out without a word. No apologies. No glances back. And when the doors closed behind them, a collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Elsie smiled gently. "Let's begin again." The following week, I received an envelope in the mail, not from the HOA, but from the County Board of Supervisors. Inside was a formal letter of commendation in recognition of Mr. Thomas Carter, whose perseverance, civic responsibility, and commitment to community transparency inspired the reassessment of HOA authority in the greater Willow County region. It was signed by the chairwoman of the board. I didn't know what to do with it at first. I wasn't used to being thanked by governments. I wasn't looking for recognition, but Lily was. "Can we frame it?" she asked. So we did. It hangs just inside the front door now, next to a photo of Lily holding a watering can, grinning beside our repainted cedar fence. Later that month, Willow Creek held its first neighborhood rebuilding day. It wasn't about fixing roads or mowing lawns. It was about trust, about starting fresh. There were listening sessions, volunteer sign-ups, barbecue in the park. A new committee was formed this time, not to enforce rules, but to create community projects, a garden, a reading bench, even plans for a neighborhood mural. I was asked to lead one of the teams. I said yes, because if you want a community to be better, you have to help build it. And sometimes what you build out of conflict is stronger than what you had before. That night, Lily and I sat under the stars. She had dragged 2 sleeping bags onto the back patio. We stared up at the sky, her small hand tucked in mine. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah. Are we still fighting the fence people?" I smiled. "No, baby. We're done fighting." She looked relieved. "Good. Can we plant sunflowers now?" I nodded. "We can plant whatever we want." And as I looked across the yard, quiet, safe hours, I realized something. The real victory wasn't just winning in court, or watching Patricia walk away. The real victory was this moment. sitting in peace beside my daughter, knowing we were safe. Knowing that the fence we built wasn't just to keep things out. It was there to protect everything we loved within. Spring arrived like an exhale. For the first time since Wed moved into Willow Creek, the grass came in thick and green. Birds nested in the trees behind the house and the slope once the center of conflict bloomed with wildflowers and native plants. The tension that had once coiled tightly around our neighborhood had begun to loosen, unwind, and slowly disappear. We were no longer under siege. There were no more HOA letters taped to my door. No more fines. No more veiled threats from board members pretending to speak for community order. Instead, there were invitations to potlucks, to backyard dinners, to planning meetings about the new community garden we were building where Patricia once tried to expand HOA territory with stone planters and control. The HOA had been restructured, its power reined in and redefined. It no longer felt like a regime. It felt like what it should have been all along, a loose framework to protect shared spaces, not to police private lives. And for me, that meant it was finally time to build the final fence. Not the one we originally erected, though it still stood proud and steady. This new one would be purely symbolic, a short stone border that wrapped around a small garden Lily and I had been planning for months. Sunflowers like she asked for, lavender to remember Ms. Larson's story, and rosemary for remembrance. It was more than a flower bed. It was a line in the soil that said, "This is ours," and we protect it with love, not fear. The day we started digging, Lily wore her little canvas hat with a pink band. She had her kid-sized gloves on and a plastic spade she insisted worked just as well as mine. We worked for hours side by side, turning earth-laying stones, laughing in the sun. Neighbors passed by and waved. A few stopped to help. One man, Carlos, a quiet widower from 3 doors down, offered us some tomato seedlings. "They do best next to sunflowers," he said. And just like that, we had a community garden, not just a family one. That evening, after cleaning up, I found a small box on our porch. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a hand-carved wooden sign. The note read, "Thomas, for all the things we couldn't say when Patricia was in charge, thank you. You didn't just win a fight. You gave this neighborhood its voice back. From all of us." The sign, it read, "Respect lives here." I stared at it for a long time, then walked to the fence and mounted it right above the post, where Lily's name was etched in the concrete. She came out minutes later, her hair still damp from the shower, and looked up at it. "Did we get a trophy?" she asked. I smiled. "Something like that." She squinted. "What's it say?" I read it aloud slowly. "Respect lives here." She nodded. "I like that better than no trespassing." I laughed. "Me too." That weekend we hosted another block gathering, this time in the backyard. A simple table, plastic chairs, lemonade, and grilled corn. But the most important thing wasn't the food. It was the feeling. There was laughter, real laughter. Kids chased each other barefoot. Dogs lay under picnic tables. Neighbors who once never spoke now exchanged recipes and stories. And in the middle of it all, Lily stood with a clipboard asking people to draw their dream plant for the community garden mural we'd decided to paint on the new HOA utility shed. She came up to me at one point, grinning. "Mr. Walter wants to draw a cactus," she said, but I told him it's okay as long as it's smiling. "Sounds fair," I said. She looked around at the party, then whispered, "This is my favorite day ever." I knelt beside her. "Mine too." Later that night, after the guests had gone home and Lily was asleep, I sat outside with a cup of coffee. The fence cast long shadows in the moonlight. The garden still smelled of turned soil and sun-warmed rosemary. And I thought back to that first notice taped to my door like a threat, to Patricia's clipped voice, to the way I felt standing alone in the backyard wondering if Wed made a mistake moving here, and now how far would come. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a neighbor, a community member, a father who stood his ground not just for property lines, but for peace, for truth, and for a future where his daughter wouldn't have to fight the same battles. Weeks later, I got one final piece of mail. It wasn't from the HOA. It wasn't from the city or the county. It was from Naomi, the journalist. Inside was a simple card, and a printed clipping of an op-ed shed written, "When one voice refuses to bow." She had written, "Every town has its lines, fences, rules, expectations. But some lines are invisible lines drawn in our hearts between what we tolerate and what we defend." Thomas Carter didn't just protect a piece of wood on a hill. He protected the right to be left alone when you've done nothing wrong. He reminded us that courage at its best isn't loud. It's steady, like a fence, holding fast, rooted deep, weathering the storm until the sun returns. I folded the clipping and tucked it into the back of our family photo album. Maybe Lily would read it someday. Maybe not. But I would always know we didn't just win a fight. We built a life, and we did it together.